So welcome everyone again. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Leo Alfonso. I work in the International Relations and Partnerships team for the STEM disciplines here at ANU. My colleague Chami from the college is on the line as well. And of course, we're joined by Dr. Kristen Murray. I'll do a proper introduction in a minute. So let's change that slide. Before we get started, I'm going to take a brief moment to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people who are the traditional owners of the land on which ANU is located. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Again, we're very lucky to have Dr. Kristen Murray with us today. Thanks for your time today. And I'm sure most of you already read her bio, so I'll keep the introduction short. Dr. Murray is a senior lecturer in the Research School of Psychology at ANU, where she also leads the Master of Professional Psychology. She is passionate about promoting health and well-being in the community. Her research in clinical and health psychology focuses on body image, specifically on how individuals relate to functional experiences of the body and its implications for health, behaviors, and well-being. And I think that is a good way to hand over to you. Kristen, thank you again. And I'll stop sharing. And yes, over to you.
All right, thank you so much. I am just going to get my presenter. Yep, excellent. I can assume you can see the slides okay. Beautiful, excellent. Thank you so much. It's really exciting to be here today. So thank you for having me and thank you for coming along to hear about some of the research that we're undertaking here at the ANU in the Body Image Literacy Lab, which is a group of students and researchers really passionate about expanding our knowledge and examining knowledge as well around body image and its role in health and well-being. So what I wanted to speak about today was some work that we've been undertaking applying mental health literacy in body image. And so today I wanted to share a little bit of information about some research studies we've recently published that are examining what we know or what we think about body image as community members and some of the areas that we're taking this work moving forward. But what I wanted to do before I start talking through what I'll be discussing today and getting into any particular content is just to give the people here a moment because body image is something that we actually hear a lot about in the community. But often we talk about body image in really particular ways. So I wanted to just get you to have a think about what comes to mind immediately for you, what jumps into your mind, what images or words, what kinds of things might stand out to you, and just kind of hold that for a moment. So I'll give you a little bit of time just to ponder that. Excellent. Hopefully that's enough time. And what I'd like you to do is just kind of hold that as we go through the talk today, because one of the areas that we've been focusing on in body image is how we understand body image and its complexity, because there's actually quite a lot that comprises body image that we don't often talk about or that doesn't often come to mind immediately when we talk about body image. So what I'd like to then talk a little bit about as we go through today is what body image is, why it matters for us to have a comprehensive and holistic understanding of body image and how it might impact health and well-being. And then I'm going to share a problem, a discrepancy that we've noticed in the research that has really important implications for our efforts to promote health and well-being in the community and why this led us to understand or undertake research focused on mental health literacy around body image in and of itself, and some recent studies that we've undertaken in this area and what that tells us about this important space and where we're going to move with this as we go forward in our work. So one of the things that is really interesting about body image is it receives a lot of attention in our discussions in the community, and that is for very good reason. I'm going to flag some of those reasons a little bit more in a moment. But body image itself is really an umbrella term that is capturing our relationship with our physical self. So in terms of defining what body image is, it comprises a range of different aspects of our relationship that include the way we think about our body, the way we feel about our body, and the behaviours that we engage in as related to our body. It also includes the way we perceive or see our body as well, though I'll speak mostly about the attitudinal components today, so those thoughts, feelings, and behaviours. And what's really interesting about body image is that there are some misconceptions around body image as well when we talk about this in the community, or at least misconceptions in terms of how we might understand body image from a research perspective. And so really important areas of body image that are important to understand are that it's subjective. So it's about our own appraisal of our body, our relationship with our body, and that is a really highly personal relationship that we have. So it's not actually about what other people think of our bodies, though that could impact on the way we relate to our own body. And it's not actually about the objective attributes or characteristics of our body, though of course that might also impact upon those subjective relationships that we have with our physical self. Despite what we often hear is that there are very vulnerable groups in our community that are more likely to experience body image concerns, which is really important, and that's where a lot of research attention has been focused. We all actually have a body image, and in fact we have body images. There are lots of different complex components of body image that I'll share as we move through today, and so it's really important that we're thinking about body image as related to every single person in the world, and that some may be particularly vulnerable, but all of us have a very complex, nuanced and personal relationship with our physical self that's important in our health and well-being. And so because we have lots of discussions around body image, it's really important to be clear about why that might be, and that is because we have good evidence that body image concerns are common in the community. So many people struggle in their relationship with their physical self. These are some percentages out of the United States. One study suggested about 60% of men and about 46% of women were satisfied with their overall body. And those percentages change depending on which aspects of the body we might be thinking about. And of course, that might change based on regions or time points in which we're measuring body image. But what those statistics tell us is that many people in the community may could do with some benefits or improvements in enhancing their relationship with their body. And this term normative discontent is used to really describe how common body image concerns are in the community. But just because it's frequent and common, it doesn't necessarily mean it's something that we should accept or not try to change and improve, because it has impacts on our health and well-being in important ways. There is extensive evidence that body image concerns impact health and well-being, and so numerous studies suggest that feeling more negatively about the body are a risk factor for a number of different outcomes, including eating disorders, depression, anxiety, and health behaviours that may not be or may be harmful to the body, so things like smoking. And on the flip side, having a positive relationship with your body is protective. So it's associated with lower levels of things like depression or eating disorders, but also higher levels of emotional well-being, life satisfaction, and also eating in a way that nourishes and meets the needs of the body too. So body image is both representing a potential risk or a resource for individuals, depending on the relationships we have with our physical self. And we recently have had data out of the United States again that highlights just how costly or how impactful body image concerns are in the community. So this study looked at the cost of body dissatisfaction in 2019 alone and found an $84 billion direct impact. So that included things like productivity in individuals and a $221 billion indirect cost, which is accounting for its widespread impacts on health and well-being as well. And so this is a really significant and impactful problem in the community that we really need to address. And in fact, people have called for greater attention on body image concerns or negative body image as a public health issue in its own right, and one of the top standalone issues in public health. And that's because of its impacts on an individual, including their quality of life, the way they relate to themselves more broadly, and of course its role as a risk factor for a range of different health and wellbeing outcomes too. So there's a really kind of consistent picture that we have in the community that body image is important, that it impacts people in really important ways, and that there is a need for us to be attending to this and addressing this in the community to promote health and well-being. However, what's really interesting as a field is that the body image research literature has tended to have a particular lens. It's tended to focus on particular high-risk groups for good reason, because they need support. And it's tended to focus on specific aspects of body image. So it's not necessarily accounting for body image entirely or in a sort of holistic sense. And so what I wanted to do before we move into some of the research we've been undertaking is to walk you through some key distinctions within the body image field that highlight all of the different ways we might relate to ourselves that are really important for us to be thinking about. And so while we have extensive evidence in some areas of body image, there's lots of work we still need to do to understand the ways we experience our body, how we feel and think about that, and the kinds of behaviours we might engage in as a result of that. So to walk you through that, I wanted to take you through three key distinctions, three areas that we've had a lot of discussion and focus on here in our work at the ANU. So the first is that body image is multidimensional. And what I mean by that is that there's lots of different parts or components to body image that mean we can look at or measure body image in a range of different ways. And so when I mentioned the areas that we've tended to focus on in research, but also in practice, the key area is around evaluations. So body dissatisfaction would be an example of negative evaluations of the body. And this evaluative dimension is really reflecting that subjective appraisal, subjective relationship that we have with our physical self and the degree to which we like or dislike our body. And so this is a really important aspect of body image that many studies or most studies have tended to focus on because it's related to mental health or wellbeing outcomes. But there's another really important dimension that's just as important as evaluations, and that is investment. And investment is an area that doesn't necessarily receive a lot of attention, but actually has associations with mental health and wellbeing as well, and can also increase the impact of evaluations of the body on these outcomes too. So investment in the body is really capturing the degree of importance of our body to ourselves or to our life, the amount of time or attention we pay to our body or trying to change the body, for example, and the degree to which aspects of our body impact our evaluations of our self-worth. So for example, if our appearance affected the way we felt about ourselves as people. And so investment in the body is a really critical component of body image that is really important when we're thinking about the impacts it could be having on health and well-being. It has just received a lot less attention than some of the other aspects of body image. So if we're thinking about body image, these are kind of two key dimensions that we want to be capturing to fully appreciate how it might affect health and well-being. And a second distinction that I wanted to highlight, which is particularly important in the studies I'll tell you about today, is that our experiences of the body occur across a range of different aspects of our experience. So that includes appearance, and this is often where most studies have focused, and often when we talk about body image, this is what first comes to mind. So at the beginning, if this is what kind of jumped into your head, that absolutely reflects where most studies and most attention has been paid to date. And appearance or aesthetic aspects of the body, things like weight, shape, muscularity, hair or skin texture and tone, all really impact upon the way we feel about our body. So that could be the way we evaluate our body, so our satisfaction with appearance, for example, or the investment we have in appearance or in our bodies in this area. So perhaps determining our self-worth based on our appearance, which is really common, particularly in a culture where we promote certain aspects of attractiveness over others. But appearance is one part of our body experience, and there are many other aspects of our bodily experience that are just as important if we're thinking about body image. And one of the areas that we have a lot of research being focused on here at the ANU and elsewhere across the world is on body functionality. And this is really capturing what our bodies can do or are capable of doing, or for some people, what our bodies are not doing that we wish they were doing. And so body functionality includes a range of different factors. So it includes things like our capacity to engage in physical movement, the capacity of our body to undertake health processes, so things like digestion or maintaining our good health and wellness. sensory experiences, so things like our capacity to see, touch, taste, experience pleasure or pain, our capacity to communicate with people around us or engage in cognitive processes, so thinking or problem solving. So any of those attributes of what our bodies can do can also be part of the way we relate to our physical self and part of our body image. And so if you're looking then at how we might distinguish dimensions and domains of body image, you can be invested in or evaluate appearance as part of your body image and also function, and they might even differ. You might be really satisfied with one and less satisfied with the other, for example, or at different times of your life that might shift as well. So you can start to see this complex picture building around what body image is really reflecting in our lives. And so the final aspect or distinction that I wanted to make, the third D, is really getting into the degree to which they're positive or negative. And so one of the areas that much of the research has focused is around negative body image or feeling critical of the body, being dissatisfied with the body. But there's lots of studies actually that suggest we can also be unhappy with body functionality. And I have a quote up there on the slide, which is reflecting some populations where health concerns actually around body functionality, because it's in that health domain, can be really impactful on their experience of their body and their well-being. And that can include a sense that you're unable to rely on the body or that your body's betrayed you in some way. And so the quote that I have up there is from a sample of women with endometriosis in an interview or qualitative study. So functionality is a really kind of important area that actually is very salient to some populations. It just hasn't received as much attention as appearance. So there's much more work happening in this space, which is fantastic. So we're then thinking about the different ways we might relate to our body. As I've flagged, negative body image has received the majority of attention in past research, and that's because of its role as a risk factor for health and wellbeing outcomes. But there's actually been emerging focus in positive body image and what it actually means to have a positive relationship with your physical self. And we used to think about these two aspects of body image as sitting on different ends of the same continuum. So I have the sort of arrow down the bottom of the slide there for you. So we would assume if you had low levels of negative body image, for example, that you would have high levels of positive body image. So they're sort of co-varying together. And actually, that's no longer how we think about negative and positive body image. So negative body image, as I flagged, could include dissatisfaction, feeling preoccupied with the body, being really critical of the body, or even investing too much in the body so that you're placing too much of your self-worth on appearance or functionality or both. Positive body image, however, is actually an adaptive relationship. So it's really focused on love and acceptance and respect for the body, showing gratitude and appreciation for the body, and behaving in a way that takes care of the body, protects the body, and nurtures the body and its needs. And so we actually think about these as separate and distinct, though they're related. And that means they actually considered to vary along their own continuums, which means you could be high on negative body image and high on positive body image at the same time. Or you might be low on both or some combination in between, noting that these change through experiences in our day-to-day life as well. And so when you would add that additional component around the degree to which you feel positively or negatively around your body, you can start to just see why there are so many components of body image and why it's important for us to be thinking broadly or holistically to fully understand the role of body image and health and wellbeing in our lives. So now that I've covered some of the key distinctions in body image, what I wanted to do was move to a problem. And this is the problem that I'll spend the rest of our session today focused on, which is really understanding a key discrepancy that we are noticing in research, though it's a limited field. And that is that given that we know how impactful negative body image is on health and well-being, there's a need for treatments or interventions to be available to people to provide support, help them improve their relationship with their body, and then hopefully improve health and well-being as well. And we actually do have evidence-based treatment programs, particularly cognitive behaviour therapy programs that are effective in improving body image. Yet, the very limited research that we have available to us suggests that few people seek help for these issues. And that means we have a very large percentage of people in the population who might be struggling in their relationship with their body, therefore vulnerable to a range of different health and wellbeing impacts, but not actually seeking help or receiving support for those issues, which is a problem. That's a discrepancy that we would like to solve. And the statistic that I have up there on the slide of 10% is actually from a sample of young people with eating disorders in Australia that is a high-risk population for body image concerns. So that's a very low percentage of a group that would be at high risk for these issues. Though there was also evidence from this project that suggested that if people identified that they had body image concerns, they were much more likely to seek help, which suggests perhaps an area that we might be able to target around somebody's capacity to be aware of or identify when they're experiencing these concerns, and that they're able to go and seek help and support to address them. So this really for us as researchers here was an interesting question around what might be getting in the way. If body image concerns are so common in the community and described as a normative discontent, why aren't people getting help? And what might be something that we could do to help them reach out for help and receive support when they need it? And thankfully for us, there's a very large body of research that's targeted at exactly this question within mental health more broadly, and that's mental health literacy. And many people here will actually be familiar with this. This is a construct that came out of the health literacy field and is focused on knowledge and beliefs about mental disorders or mental health issues which aid their recognition, management, or prevention. So what we could help people do is have a better understanding of mental health issues so that they're able to notice when they or others are experiencing those concerns, and then know where to seek help or how to seek help so that they can improve their own or others' health and well-being. And there is a very large body of research focused on mental health literacy across a range of conditions that includes depression, anxiety disorders, eating disorders, and those studies are suggesting that if we can increase mental health literacy, then we can increase people's engagement with help and support, which ultimately is designed to improve their health and well-being. Yet within the mental health literacy field, there has been very little attention on body image and very little attention on risk factors, which includes body image as well. So we wanted to set out to run some studies to understand whether people knew what body image was, whether they could recognise body image concerns, and what they would suggest people do when they notice that they're experiencing those concerns as well. And that was by applying this definition of mental health literacy into body image to understand how we could help people in the population. So when we started looking into this work, actually there was very little research in this space, which is really interesting and was quite surprising to us, but there were some trends that I think are important to flag. So the first is that studies in this space suggest there are knowledge gaps, and those knowledge gaps are across different areas. They included a lack of knowledge around body functionality as being part of body image, and that people might experience functionality concerns, that they may assume it's a problem only in young people or in women, for example, even though everybody experiences body image concerns, and in fact men quite commonly experience concerns as well. There was also evidence that there was minimisation of these concerns, and that may actually reflect just how common body image concerns actually are in the community. But there was evidence from some studies that people would both, at the same time as describing that they were experiencing body image concerns and they had impacts, minimise the need to seek help and support. And so it could be that they're actually not aware that they can seek help and support, or that there is something getting in the way of them doing that. And of course, as I've already flagged for you, there were low rates of help seeking for those concerns as well. So we really felt like one of the ways we could understand barriers to help seeking would be by applying mental health literacy within this field. And so we really wanted to start doing some work in this area to build a field of work to help us address these gaps or barriers in the community. So often in mental health literacy studies, there's a very set paradigm that's employed to investigate mental health literacy. And so that paradigm includes presenting our participants with a vignette, so a fictional vignette about a person that is experiencing symptoms of whatever the focal problem is that you're investigating. So in our case, that's body image concerns. And what you would then do is invite the person to read that vignette and reflect on that vignette, and then answer some questions about the vignette that give us a sense of the degree to which a person might understand or have literacy about a particular area. So you would often ask people whether they felt there was a problem depicted and what that problem is, what they believed about the problem. So is that a serious problem? Do you have sympathy for the person? And these are really getting a sense of whether there's stigmatizing attitudes present that might actually get in the way of help seeking, and whether the person would benefit from help and support, and if so, where would you recommend they go and seek that support? And that's often from sources, so particular professional or informal help sources. And in combination, that will give us a picture of mental health literacy within that particular domain. And so we were really excited as we started this work to see that there was actually a study that had applied this paradigm to body image. And so the work that I'll tell you about in a moment was adapting and replicating but extending this really important and interesting study. This study was undertaken by Veer Swami in the UK, and what they did was they had a sample of sort of a fairly balanced sample of men and women. And they presented participants with a vignette that described a woman or a vignette describing a man that had body image concerns. And those concerns were sensitive to the gender differences we see in body image concerns. So they read each of the vignettes and then they answered questions, as I flagged we would typically do with the mental health literacy paradigm. And what was really interesting was there were very low rates of recognition, and the rates actually were lower than what we would typically see with other conditions, things like eating disorders or depression. So Kate, so that was the female vignette, had an 18.1% recognition of body image as the main problem. So people were suggesting other main problems, but not necessarily body image. And the recognition was about 12% for Jack, so it was lower for the male identifying vignette. What's also interesting is there were some gender differences in the participants themselves. So the women in the study typically did better, and that's a trend we see in mental health literacy research. They were more likely to recommend professional help sources, for example, whereas men were more likely to recommend informal supports. But what was really interesting for us in reviewing this study is that even though the women tended to do better, because women are a vulnerable group, the gap between how prevalent they were rating the concern in Kate to be and the recognition of that suggested quite a substantial gap between their ability to know that body image issues were common, but also then accurately identify that they were present in a fictional vignette. So we wanted to really focus in on women, particularly for the initial work we were undertaking, and we're looking to expand our samples from here. But the second area we wanted to really look into was around the body image concerns themselves. So the study focused on appearance concerns, as of course makes a lot of sense. And that's reflective of research in the field more broadly. But because we have a particular interest in functionality-based concerns in our lab here, we really wanted to expand that to look at literacy of appearance and functionality concerns to see if they might have a difference. So what I wanted to do is just share some findings from the two studies that I flagged that we undertook looking at literacy of negative body image in women in the community. And both of these were just recently published. So what I wanted to do, they both have a lot of different interesting findings. I'm just going to pick out a couple of really key takeaways. The first one was a study led by Jessica Hewitt, who's currently undertaking a PhD in this area, and this was part of their fourth year research, really which was focused on looking at the difference between appearance and body functionality and literacy around those concerns. And the second was a team of Master of Professional Psychology students here who we were really interested in looking both at the differences between appearance and function, but also whether it made a difference if we manipulated in the experimental study the weight described in the individual. So whether people, because weight stigma is so pervasive in our community, whether people would have a different perspective on the need for help or different beliefs about the problem or the person depicted if we manipulated the description based on weight status. And that was because we felt weight stigma might actually impede mental health literacy in this context. So I'll start with the functionality focus first. So whether domain of body image experience matters in mental health literacy of negative body image. So this was a sample of about 200 women in the community, and we were using the mental health literacy paradigm. And so I've included just some snapshots of the kinds of information we had in the vignette, but the full vignettes are in the published paper. And of course, we were adapting materials from the original study in this area as well. So I recommend that original study if you're interested. So this was described describing a young woman that had body image concerns related to appearances is exactly what had been previously used. And we had a range of different indicators, so feeling unhappy with appearance, being preoccupied or trying to change appearance, comparing their body and being fearful of not meeting ideals around the body that are perpetuated in our communities or in our cultures. And then we matched the same vignette, but to a young woman experiencing concerns in body functionality. And we focused specifically on physical ability or physical movement. We would like to expand that out in our future studies, but it was because that's the most commonly examined component of body functionality. And so we felt as the first study to look at this, we really wanted to make sure that we were using something that might be recognised more easily or more likely to be recognised to give a kind of fair comparison. So we presented people with both of these. They had those in random order, and then we asked a series of questions, as I flagged, with the mental health literacy paradigm. And our findings were surprisingly consistent with the original study by Swami and Knowles, which is really interesting. So in terms of recognition, body image was recognised as the primary problem in 33% in the appearance condition and 21% in the functionality condition, and that was a significant difference. So we had greater recognition when the body image concerns were around appearance compared to function. The top rated main problem was self-esteem or self-confidence, which maps previous research, which was very interesting. And then we had a range of other related issues, suggesting people were picking up related areas, but not necessarily identifying specifically the body image was the problem. And I've only depicted the top 5 there. What we also saw, particularly because we were interested in the differences on domain, was that we had significantly greater ratings of prevalence, distress, sympathy, need for help, and help-seeking intentions if it was you that was affected with those particular concerns depicted in the vignette for the appearance compared to functionality condition. And so collectively, this tells us that literacy was better in the appearance compared to functionality concerns condition. And so people were doing better overall when the concerns around body image were appearance focused compared to functionality focused. And that fits with our discussion commonly being about appearance in the community and in research. So that makes a lot of sense, but maybe suggests a gap that we could do some work in. The second area that I wanted to flag, which I think is really interesting, is around the help-seeking sources recommended. And so I know this is a figure that's it's got a lot going on. There are 3 things I wanted to highlight for you that I think tell us something about how people might be thinking about body image concerns and the domain difference. The first is this difference here. So there was significantly greater recommendations if Kate was a friend for people to see medical or psychological, essentially mental health professionals in the appearance condition compared to the functionality condition. So that may suggest to us that people are more likely to think that appearance concerns sit within the mental health space. And then we had the reverse pattern for our functionality recommendations. And that is people were more likely to recommend that Sally, who is our functionality vignette, should seek help from a exercise or diet professional versus the appearance condition. And that's really interesting. And to us, that suggested that maybe functionality concerns were being associated with kind of more lifestyle change behaviour, so sort of changing the body, and not necessarily reflective of mental health concerns or areas of focus, which is really interesting for us and suggests something that might be different in how people are interpreting functionality versus appearance concerns. The other little trend I wanted to note, which I think is really interesting, is this difference, which we were not testing, but is a pattern or a trend that I think is really interesting and important to note. And that is that people were much more likely to indicate that they would cope alone if it was them experiencing those concerns compared to if it was the friend. So that suggests to us people are much more willing to recommend that somebody go and seek help when it's their friend, and we're not actually particularly likely to want to go and seek help and support themselves if they were experiencing body image concerns. So they had sort of low intentions to seek help and high intentions for themselves to cope alone. And so that really suggests that there are some barriers getting in the way of people seeking help for themselves, though they're much more likely to recommend people seek help for others. So the second study that I wanted to highlight before I wrap us up is our investigation of whether the weight of the individual in the vignette made a difference. And as I flagged earlier, this was based on a really large body of work in weight stigma that suggests that people with a higher weight experience judgment, discrimination based on their weight, and that's because of weight stigma in our communities. And what that can do is actually impact upon the healthcare that someone receives or their willingness to seek help for healthcare, because people may have a sense of being blamed or judged by other people. And so we wanted to investigate whether this might play out in somebody's need to seek help and support for body image concerns as well. So the way that we investigated that in our second study was in an experimental design. And so people read one vignette out of 4 options. And that vignette either depicted appearance-related body image concerns or functionality-related body image concerns. And then we manipulated the description of the weight status of the individual. So the original study and our previous study that I flagged described Kate or Sally in our previous study as of normal weight. So we manipulated a description of the person as being overweight. And that was based on research suggesting that type of term is acceptable, but we know, of course, people's preferences around descriptions of weight vary widely. And so we used that as one we felt could be appropriate for the manipulation of that experimental condition in this study. And then we asked people the same types of questions, but actually included some additional variables, assessing whether people were blaming or holding that person responsible, which are very much more stigmatizing type evaluations for the person. So just to make sure that that's clear in case it was a bit confusing, so we had either appearance or functionality concerns depicted or normal weight or higher weight in the individual. And that was to get a combination that would allow us to look at whether there were differences in those evaluations. So we had, again, very similar findings in our recognition. So 30% of our participants across all of those conditions were able to recognise body image as the primary problem. Again, we see self-esteem and confidence as the highest, though we didn't see differences across our conditions, which is really interesting. And these compare to our previous studies. So we're seeing pretty consistent patterns in both the number of people that are able to recognise body image concerns, but also the types of other factors that are highlighted within by participants. Although the recognition rates are generally low, again, it is really important to note that ratings of distress, sympathy, the need for help were all high, and ratings of blame, responsibility, and having negative emotional reactions to the person described were low. And that's really positive because that tells us that there's kind of low levels of stigmatizing attitudes present, which is really important for us to be aware of in terms of moving forward and understanding literacy in this space. What we did see was some interesting differences based on our weight status manipulation. People had greater sympathy for the person and also recommended lifestyle support options more frequently in the higher weight condition compared to the normal weight condition, which suggests perhaps there was something happening in the way people interpreted the person and their needs based on weight. And there was also a really interesting interaction that we saw. And so that basically means we saw a difference depending on weight and domain at the same time. So I just wanted to highlight for you this key difference. So this is our emotional reaction scale. So higher scores mean that somebody is having more negative emotional reactions associated with whether or not they would interact with the individual described. So Kate in this study, noting that overall scores on average were low. So they're not rating these as particularly high, but we did see a relative difference. And that is in that appearance condition. So we had a much higher or a significantly higher negative emotional reaction to somebody interacting with Kate when they were in the appearance normal weight condition compared to the appearance overweight or high weight condition. So actually that's really interesting, and it tells us something about how they might be interpreting the person. And what we wondered, we're not really sure what this means, what we wondered is whether this might be that somebody's looking at somebody with appearance concerns in the normal weight condition and wondering whether or not they should be worried about their body, whereas because weight stigma is prominent in society, if somebody had a higher weight, they might think that they understand that they might be because they're kind of deviating from what the ideals are in our society. So that's what we wondered, but we need some more research into this. We also saw a difference in the overweight condition between function and appearance, and that was in line with what we anticipated, that function would be an area of body image that isn't necessarily as well understood, and so that might result in differences in their reactions to the person as well. So some really interesting findings that we weren't expecting, so this was really interesting for us moving forward. So what this means is that literacy may be an area that we want to be attending to, and there may be key gaps that are getting in the way of people seeking help and support, particularly those low levels of recognition and some evidence of minimisation of some body image concerns. So in particular, based on our findings, the accurate recognition of body image as a problem, or as the problem depicted, and separately from factors that would be causes of body image concerns, correlates, or consequences of those concerns. So people were generally picking up things that are related to body image, but weren't necessarily identifying body image explicitly. There was evidence, of course, that functionality-based concerns may be less well understood or less well recognised, which suggests that may be a critical gap. And some suggestion that maybe the difference between subjective aspects of body image versus objective characteristics of the body may not be fully understood. So if there are recommendations around changing the body, that might suggest that the subjective component of body image and what makes body image what it is, isn't necessarily fully understood, that it's a subjective, not objective relationship with the body. And so obviously we need some more research, but what we're really taking forward is a need to be looking at education to address these gaps and support help and support in the community. And just to flag before I wrap up, there's also evidence this may be playing out in healthcare. And so some of our studies currently are looking at how we might address literacy gaps in healthcare. There are studies that suggest that even in areas where body image concerns are well known to be issues, it's not routinely addressed, that there are knowledge gaps in health professionals and also confidence gaps as well. So even where health professionals might actually have a good understanding of body image concerns, they're not necessarily sure how to work with them or what to do. And so there's a need for training and support and resources to support this work. And that's particularly because there's also studies suggesting that patients or clients want healthcare providers to raise body image in care. And so that's really important to ensure that we have people able to raise that and able to support that in their work that they're doing in a healthcare setting. And just to highlight why this matters or what might be happening that needs our attention in research is one study in cystic fibrosis as a qualitative study with young people and healthcare providers, found this really interesting discrepancy. 85% of the patients that were interviewed reported never having a conversation about body image with their provider, and 74% of providers reported having a conversation about body image. And so it may suggest that there's some differences in communication or understandings of body image that really need attention in our care, because people may benefit from support and their health and well-being may be improved by addressing this more proactively. And so we're really interested in understanding what kinds of training gaps might be helpful or important for us to address in our work to support healthcare in addressing these concerns as well. So as some take-home messages, body image is really important in the way we relate to our physical self, the way we relate to ourselves, and has impacts on our health and well-being in really important ways. And there are gaps that we see in people reaching out and seeking or getting support for these issues that mental health literacy might help us both understand and address to increase access to support and care, both for ourselves and for other people in our lives as well. And so here at the ANU in the Body Image Literacy Lab, we're really trying to understand this from different perspectives. We're looking at knowledge, stigma, and help seeking in community members. We're looking at that in healthcare professionals, and we're undertaking research that's aiming to understand the training needs of health professionals so we can really support people in providing or accessing care and support in the community so we can improve health and well-being. So if you're interested, please feel free to get in touch about our research. I would also like to acknowledge the students that were part of the projects that I discussed today. And if anyone's ever interested in information about body image, in Australia at least, there are resources online that can be really helpful, and of course reaching out for support if people need help from healthcare professionals as well. So that is me. I can hand back for questions.
Thank you very much, Kristen, for that very insightful talk and lecture. Yes, I'm fascinating how I find myself always taking notes during this lecture series. Even though as I mentioned before we started, I don't have a background in science. So again, thanks for making it also accessible. Yeah, we don't have any questions just yet. I encourage the audience to submit their questions using that Q&A box there. As I mentioned, I took some notes, and I do have a couple of questions actually of my own. So I'll get the conversation started. Oh no, we have a question here. Were the participants' perceived versus actual body appearance validated during the study? That's a question.
Yeah, so I'm guessing you mean whether we asked the participants themselves about their own body image. That's what I'm guessing, but just to add if I've missed what you're getting at. It's a great question. And what we did include in both studies was a measure of positive body image. So we didn't include a measure directly of negative body image, but we did include positive body image. And there were some correlations that we saw between that was body appreciation. And so the more people appreciated their own body, the more they were likely to recommend people seek help. In one of the studies, in Jessica's study, she also included self-objectification as a measure, and that was something she was interested in looking at. And it actually was associated with recommendations or fewer recommendations for people in the appearance condition. So people were less likely to actually recommend help for someone else with appearance concerns if they had high levels of objectification, which is something that's very common in our community. But that is something we're actually wanting to look more into, and particularly around whether or not somebody's own body image actually predicts their intentions to seek help for themselves or recommendations for others. So it's a great suggestion and something we're looking to do more in.
Thanks for that, and thanks for the question. While we wait for another question, then I'll go ahead and ask mine. And I was more thinking about cultural background and how, what role does it play in body image issues, help-seeking behaviors. And also on the other side, on the flip side, on health services, training health service providers.
Yeah, that's a really great question. We haven't directly looked into that, and because this field is so new, there's not a lot of information in this particular field, but I would imagine it varies substantially. There is research in the body image field that there are cultural differences that can be around whether it's preferences in terms of ideal bodies or what the pressures tend to be, or rates of body image concern. So there are absolutely cultural differences that we see within body image itself. Within the literacy space, in body image specifically, there's been, to our knowledge, only a couple of studies that have used that paradigm. And so it's an area we really need work, and I'd be really interested in how it might vary, why you'd be seeking help, who you'd be going to, and what kinds of services are available, or how people feel about accessing those services too, because I think that would be really important. So I don't have an answer, unfortunately, but it's a really important space.
Yeah. And also, I guess it will play a role on what is considered positive, because you mentioned it, you describe it as a continuum, right?
Yeah.
So, well, can it stretch? For someone, negative starts at a certain point, but for other people, that's still considered positive body image, I guess.
Actually, it's really variable, and for people, it is a really personal relationship people have with their body, and so it's a really interesting space, because I think people may assume that you could look at someone and know how they feel, and we can't. It's really, really different for different people, and it changes, day to day or through our lives as well. So yeah, very variable.
Yes, and that takes me actually to one of, there's still no questions here, so I continue. So one of my biggest takes is this whole, how you explain on body image being multi-dimensional. We have a question, and I'm going to give priority to the audience. Are there any neural pathways or conditions associated with abnormal body image? What about genetics?
That is such a great question. I don't know the answer to that, actually. I know there's lots of work in genetic predispositions in eating disorders or specific conditions. There may well be something in the body image space I'm not aware of. I will likely go and look that up as soon as I get off this webinar. That's a really, really interesting question. I'm sure there'll be something. It's just not a space that I work a lot in. So it's an excellent question. And I'm sorry I can't give a lot of insight.
And thanks for that. I'm going to, yes. So I was saying about, yes, multi-dimensions across domains of experience. Yes, I was taking note here. So then got me thinking about appearance versus functionality and how these two relate and interact, especially for people with the note I put here is permanent conditions.
Yeah.
So there are certain things we cannot change about ourselves, our bodies, and how they look and how they function. So I'm short. I cannot change that. And that also gives me, a limit to functionality, I guess. So how these two interact?
Yes, that's I really like that question. It's actually because I mean function, it's interesting. Function has been flagged in the body image field for a long time. In the 80s, there's papers talking about functions, particularly around physical movement or health, kind of the two which are understandably prominent in our discussions generally. But it's only really been in the last maybe 10 years that there's started to be a lot more focus on it from a positive standpoint. So there are studies that suggest focusing on positive aspects of function or things our bodies do for us can improve body image, which is great from an intervention standpoint. What often is not necessarily investigated is how they interact. There have been calls for that in studies, and particularly within a health context. There's some research that's looked at the combination of sort of having aesthetic, there might be, say, let's see if we're talking about concerns, aesthetic concerns, functional concerns, and concerns that bridge both. And some of the research that we do here is focused on people with chronic health conditions. And so many of those conditions have symptoms that may be aesthetic in nature, and there are symptoms that may be functional. So maybe that there's changes in their functional abilities, or there's limitations they didn't previously have, and or they're undergoing treatment which results in changes to appearance related aspects. And there hasn't really been a lot of discussion or research. I'm sure it's coming, and some of the work we're doing is trying to look at that in terms of are both important all the time? Do they amplify each other? And I think it's a really important area we need to be thinking about, like how they co-occur as well. So your question's a really fantastic one. And I think what's really important, because it is a subjective relationship, there are treatments available, there are ways we can improve our relationship with our body, that's not even about body change. So particularly where change isn't possible, changing the way we relate to it is an option and can be really helpful in ways that are realistic for people, of course. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Great. Thank you very much.
Great question. You're right on the money.
Oh, thanks for that. Yeah, thanks for that. We don't have any questions left. And I don't know if we're going to be receiving any. So so I think if you like, we can call it a day. And thank you so much for your time and for sharing your work and the research you and your team are doing here at the AMU.
My pleasure.
Thanks for the audience and the attendees to join us today. And it has been great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.